Hello, Culture Matters podcast. Today, I'm very excited to introduce you to our guest. Before I do that, here is a quote I picked just for this episode. Sometimes people don't want to hear the truth because they don't want their illusions destroyed. Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche. My good friend, Dr. David Yerkes, is back. Holistic advisor for your all things betterment of performance, not just your mind, not just your spirit, not just your intellect. It all starts with understanding your body and what you eat and how you view stress and exercise. We're back today to talk about one of the core four: stress management and emotional wellness. Thanks for coming back.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Firstly, I want to know about this quote because I picked it intentionally because I'm assuming I know something about stress management. Sometimes people don't want the truth to hear the truth because they don't want their illusions destroyed. Did that resonate with the idea of stress management counsel on any level?
I think there's something called cognitive dissonance that goes along with that. And so I think it's a very common thing that we see. I think there's people that avoid things as a kind of an instinctual reaction to stress. Like they know it's going to be stressful, so they avoid it. So there's that, or they even avoid thinking about it. We do see that in medicine sometimes too. People don't want to hear bad news, so they avoid even seeking help. So that's one thing that one way that quote could be applied. But I think also he's trying to talk about maybe just, self-examination and evaluation of your own personal areas of growth, potential growth, and things like that. So Nietzsche was a deep thinker, so I wouldn't I wouldn't presume to know exactly what he was thinking, but I think that quote could be applied in several different ways.
What is stress management?
Well, I think stress management is your ability to manage the things in life that come at you that are that do cause stress, and without going down a negative spiral and allowing it to control your life. So I think this is a skill, I believe, that can be learned and taught, where you can learn that complete avoidance of stressful situations, stress relationships, just in general in life is not probably ever going to happen. Even the wealthiest people have stressful things in their life. So what do we do about that, and how do we handle that is stress management. And I think that there are self-destructive ways to do that. I think a lot of our human nature tends to be self-destructive in a way. It seems like that's our default, is to manage stress in a self-destructive way, and particularly, self-destructive to our health. Alcohol, smoking. I mean, nicotine's a very powerful stress reliever, and other lots of other ways that we manage stress. So one of the things that we do in our program is we teach people how to manage stress in a productive manner. And there are ways to do that. There's meditation, there's sleep optimization, and making sure you're getting the right amount of sleep. There's avoidance of self-destructive behaviors and recognition of how those are self-destructive, and oftentimes even increased stress. For instance, drinking alcohol. We talked about this a little bit before, can affect your REM sleep quality. And REM sleep is our natural antidepressant and anti-stress reliever. So it's one of those things that, again, it's almost like a self-perpetuating thing, that some of the ways that we just kind of naturally, our natural tendency to deal with stress, usually often isn't helpful, and sometimes it's actually hurtful. So we talk about how to kind of change that around, because if you're intentional about it and you recognize it, so recognition is first, right? You recognize it, and then you come up with a plan, right? Come up with a strategy and a plan on, and become intentional about it. And then you can start to develop that skill, because most of the time you're going to fall back on your own old habits and your old tendencies. And then over time, with coaching and mentorship and personal development and self-reflection, you can start to recognize your own, in the moment even, you know, how you're dealing with things, and start to reverse that and start to deal with it in a productive manner. So that's the major gist of it.
What's stress non-management look like? Or
Well, I think it's falling back on just your natural tendencies without being intentional or thinking about it, right? So I think it's just reaching for the bottle or something like that. Because I think people can recognize when they're stressed most of the time. Sometimes people don't. Sometimes it becomes so chronic that you don't even realize it. In fact, I don't know if I ever told you the story about when I was in residency, and I actually had a physical manifestation of stress, and I didn't even realize it. Did I tell you that story?
I don't think so.
So when I was in residency, I think I was a second year in residency, and I started developing shortness of breath, and it was pretty bothersome. It was noticeable. It would get worse throughout the day. Didn't really have any other symptoms, just shortness of breath. And I saw my primary doctor, and I even sought advice from a pulmonologist who I really respected. And after going through all my symptoms, and this has been going on for a couple months before I even said anything to anybody, I was going through a lot. I'd made some bad real estate investments prior to residency, and my parents were getting divorced. And then of course, just dealing with the residency is stressful enough. But I didn't feel stressed. I didn't think I was stressed. I was just like, this is just life. This is just normal life. So I talked to this pulmonologist, and after talking to me, he said, well, I think this is stress. And I was actually, I remember the feeling that I felt was, I felt disappointed. I felt like I was like, there's no way this is stress. This isn't stressed. I'm not stressed. This is not stress. So I went, and some of my workup came back from the primary doctor. Everything was normal. And I didn't think much of it. But soon after that, my wife had scheduled, we had a little bit of vacation time, and my wife had scheduled a cruise for us. And we went on the cruise, and the first day of the cruise, the shortness of breath went away. And I was experiencing this every day, and it was noticeable. And the description of the shortness of breath is kind of like, I couldn't get a deep breath. Like, I could not get a satisfying breath. And I have no lung problems. I've never smoked. I'm in relatively good shape at the time. And the first day of the cruise, my shortness of breath went away. And the first thing that came to my mind was, oh, this is environmental. It's histoplasmosis, or there's some kind of mold or something like that in the house that's affecting me. But then the last day of the cruise, it came back. And
Wow.
that's when it really hit me. And I thought, this really is stress. And the cool thing about that is, since then, I've been able to manage it, and because I was able to recognize it, but I was also able to manage it because I would try different things like meditation and things like that. But just even recognizing that, okay, this is stress, I was able to kind of handle it better. But I said all that to say that you may be having stress and not even realizing it. Most people will recognize, okay, I can't fall asleep at night because my mind is running too fast, or they are recognizing that they do emotionally feel stressed, but there are people that are under a lot of stress that may not even recognize it. But we all deal with it. I think everybody deals with some level of stress. But I do think it's important that when you do recognize it, to figure out productive ways to manage that and not self-destructive ways.
What's good about it?
What's good about stress?
Hmm.
Oh, that's a
If
great
anything.
question. So yeah, I mean, I think stress is part of the human experience, and without it, uh, I think without a certain amount of stress, stress is what forms us, right? It's what turns us into who we are, and it's what makes overcoming obstacles um worth it, right? If everything was easy, it would be demotivating, wouldn't it? So I think a certain degree of stress, if you will, difficulty, um, is is a good thing, and because that's what makes us who we are. That's what makes us. Uh, that's what's the word I'm looking for? Uh, Kind of molds us and forges, our a stronger person. If you if you're able to overcome it, and if you're able to manage it properly. Stress is it's normal. It's a normal reaction. It's a normal part of our even defense, right? As a human. It's an alert system for us. That's something we need to there's something we need to be aware of, that there might be a danger or something like that, right? So it's part of our nature and our biology, but it can run amok and it can get out of control. So we have to, especially in today's world, right? We live in a sterile environment, and I don't mean necessarily mean from germs, but you know, inside buildings and fluorescent lights, and we're away from nature, and a lot of those things have been shown to actually, well, nature and being outdoors has been shown to improve stress just by walking outside. There's been studies that show that improves stress and improves actually health markers from improving stress. So there is a benefit to managing it. Chronic stress is where the problem is, right? When it's not, if you have acute stress where you're getting through a project, or there's a true fight or flight type situation, that's when it's good. When it's constant, that's when it's bad. Even psychologically. So if you look at high performers in, say, business or industry, the people that take not just a vacation, but a true kind of like a break, usually come back more creative, enthusiastic, and everything like that. And a lot of the high performers are intentional about that, and really they've been able to figure that out, and they've been intentional about scheduling time away to recharge.
What does that look like?
Well, I think it looks different for everybody, and I think it depends on what you need. You could have a higher level of stress in your job or your career, uh, and so you might need more than other people. Some people, if they have the freedom and flexibility, might take a month and go out west or something, or go to the Bahamas or something like that, and just I think one of the more famous people that does this, and I wish I could remember exactly what he does, is actually Bill Gates. That he'll take time away completely, just unplug and get away. If I remember hearing that correctly, I believe that's correct.
Yeah, he
Uh,
goes and reads books
yes, yeah,
in a little cabin with boat, leaves it
yes,
behind.
and that has actually been shown to improve creativity and everything, and overall well being. So so yeah, there are some well known individuals that practice this, and it seems to be very effective.
What does it look like someone that isn't? So the audience can really get clear on, are they acute? Are they chronic?
Well, I think somebody that isn't, it can show up subtly, like being irritable with your family, being irritable at work, um, difficulty sleeping, um, brain fog and mental fatigue, things that we traditionally, a lot of these things, or even so, the irritable thing I really think is interesting because a lot of the times when we're irritable, it's we feel that the other person is wrong, right? And we don't necessarily recognize it as I am under uh I am under some type of influence that is causing me to get irritated at something that maybe I shouldn't be getting or not, maybe not shouldn't, but maybe wouldn't otherwise be irritated at. And maybe that behavior isn't perfectly right or whatever, but it also isn't necessarily something that you would need to expend your mental energy on. So it can look like it can present a lot of ways, and just physical fatigue, and eventually it can turn into true like genuine health problems, cardiovascular disease, um, and things like that. So there are real health consequences also to being under chronic stress as well.
What's cardiovascular disease?
So like, heart attacks and strokes and things like that.
What's a stroke?
So a stroke is when, you have a blockage in an artery in the brain and you don't get blood flow to that part of the brain, and you lose neurologic function. Some people, and it just depends on what part of the brain that blockage is in. So, you could lose the ability to speak or move one side of the body or swallow or whatever.
In a heart attack, what happens?
So it's the same mechanism. It's just in the heart. So there's some kind of plaque blockage, and it will, depending on the size of the artery that's blocked, and the how quickly that gets resolved or does not get resolved. The part of that part of the heart dies, and it can actually be fatal, and immediately, or it can just cause significant dysfunction of the heart failure, and that kind of thing. So a heart attack, there's all kinds of different classifications of heart attacks, and I could, it wouldn't really probably be helpful to get into the weeds on that, but ultimately it's a blockage in, where the artery is supplying the blood flow and the oxygen to the heart, and then the heart has either death or dysfunction from that.
Could a lack of acute stress lead to chronic stress?
Ooh, that's a very good question. I believe that you might be onto something there. So a life of ease, essentially, I think there is some credence to that, where our physiology and our psychology is kind of expecting some type of difficulty in some way. And if you have nothing at all, then your mind starts creating things to feel stressed about, essentially. I have seen that. I don't know. I can't cite any medical literature on that, but I definitely have seen that. I think we see that sometimes in people uh that are very very well off, maybe, or people, maybe even the children of people that have done very well. And so, and that's I'm sure there's a lot of other
Well,
influences there.
I want your thoughts on this. Acute stress be a result of a psychological interaction between the future, the past, and discernment of the present. Meaning, I say, I want to do this in the future. I want this in the future. I have a goal.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So objective A, and I'm looking in the past, that didn't work. Who am I?
Right.
Like there's a contention with me, like me right now, which is rooted in me then. I'm projecting an outcome I want.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to get that outcome I want, my understanding of what you're saying would be that would create acute stress, anxiety without a plan, or I'm sorry, I guess, anxiety without a plan can't be excitement type of psychological state. So like there's acute stress would be a result of doing something, moving towards something.
Right.
Subjectively.
Or away.
Well,
from a danger or something like that.
Well, yeah. So if I'm making this plan, anything that I have to move away from other things that I could be doing, I need impulse control.
Right.
So if somebody is a part of a culture and that culture isn't fostering acute stress for the constituents, they're going to be anxious and insecure and
mm-hmm.
entitled enough to be chronically irritable and pissed off.
Yes.
That's the thesis. What do you think?
I think it's an excellent thesis. Yes. I think those three words that you just used are all contributory. Those feelings and those emotions are all contributory. The feeling of entitlement, the feeling of insecurity, all can contribute to acute or chronic stress.
And the people in positions of control of the organization, the chief executive officers, they're not just because they're in a position of power, that institution, that position creates its own milieu of entitlement. Without the next stage, all right, we're here. Where are we going next? Where have we come from? Who have we been? What do we not? What can't we do to get there? Without that, yes, I wouldn't want to put it just on the people of an institution, but it's interesting. I've never thought of it in these terms, obviously, but chronic stress, right, versus acute stress,
right?
We need
plans. Because acute stress.
Desires.
Yeah, I would say acute stress is something that is probably normal and natural and even beneficial, like you said, like you brought up. Could be potentially beneficial. Even to say,
well, wouldn't it just be a result of action and interaction, like being a person that's trying to survive? Like just to survive, we're under acute stress if we're not letting ourselves die.
Yes, exactly. To some degree, yeah.
So if our basic needs are met and we don't have acute stress, whether it's us, it's if someone isn't leading us towards it, then we have to lead ourselves towards it.
Right.
So in the context of a corporate culture, the institution helps itself by helping its people develop acute stress through doing their damn job.
Right. Goals, consequences.
Being a part of something.
Right.
Being incentivized, right? Little dopamine.
Incentives, yeah, absolutely.
The serotonin from helping people.
And there's there's cultural stress in place as well, right? There's expectations, cultural expectations and things like that, which again isn't necessarily a bad sign
of a corporate culture would be that creates chronic stress.
Oh, there's definitely corporate cultures that do create chronic stress for sure. Absolutely. I would say that's probably more common than a corporate culture that is creating a good stressful environment, if you will.
are there resources like books that you could recommend on this? Like I come to mind like people like Robert Sapolsky or something. You know, if you've ever heard of him, but like physiology, biology, neuroscience type plate resources that you would recommend, because I want to go deeper into this subject.
You
Like
know,
I don't know if you've ever heard of Robert Sapolsky's Behave book,
I have heard of
Endocrinologist.
that.
Yeah, like that's a freaking awesome, like just such a, it's a heavy book. It's a big read.
Right.
But like anything in that train of thought you could recommend to the audience.
So, so probably, I would have to, I'll have to be honest and say there's not one particular book that comes to the top of my mind as far as, the psychological, physical effects of stress in a corporate culture. But I'm, of course, a big fan of leadership and leadership qualities. And so most of my reading has been in that kind of realm or genre. I would say most of as far as books go, as most of the stuff as far as, stress and psychological stress or physical stress has been, I think, more, uh, you know, like literature based as far as single pieces of literature versus a book or something like that.
Yeah, that'd be too stressful. Woo! What are some leadership books?
Oh, I think probably one of my favorite leadership book right now is probably a book called Permission to Speak Freely. And I think that is something that a lot of leaders struggle with. Everybody will say it, right? But do you actually have the confidence as a leader to hear somebody that has a different opinion than you or has different input? I think a good leader we've talked about this in the past, a good leader will not only accept, but encourage, differing views and opinions. Because if all you have is an echo chamber, you're hurting yourself as an organization and as a leader. So that's probably my favorite book right now is on leadership. Good to
Yeah,
Great is a
if
really good
people
one.
can't speak, that will create anxiety and repression. And I could see in the trains of thought of stress that would negate the acute stress because they're not bought into the plan, or they're not, and there's issues in the plan, and they don't feel safe to share it, so they just hold it, and then they can implode and blow up schools and become motivational speakers and all sorts of shit.
Well, I would say what usually happens is what happens a lot of times is you'll have people that are really good, passionate people and would really help your organization, and they end up becoming silent, and that's a really bad sign. Um, because you know that means they're on their way out, basically, at least emotionally. And if you have people like that, then you want to hear them out. Now, as a leader, you still have to weigh those things, and you might not agree with them, and you might make a decision that doesn't necessarily go along with what that person said, and that's fine. But the more people you can listen to, especially the people that are doing the work and the people that are, involved in the company, not just in the leadership or as the C-suite, the more you can hear from them, the better you're going to be as a leader, the better you're going to understand your company and your corporate culture. And if there's not a mechanism in place to hear from those people, truly hear from them, uh, then your organization is not performing the way it could. And most, well, I don't want to say most leaders, I don't have the data on that. My experience says that it is difficult to create the environment and the culture that encourages people to say things that may not go along with the what they believe the leaders think or want to hear. So if you are not actively if you're not actively promoting that, then you're probably not getting it. And you're only getting an echo chamber, and you're hurting yourself and your organization as a leader, in my opinion. And I've seen it.
What happens?
Well, it's kind of like a slow death, if you will. And it doesn't even have to mean that the company will die, but it definitely underperforms, at least, if nothing else, because you're missing out on information that only your people can give you, right? So you're missing out on that valuable information. And if you don't have the confidence to hear that as a leader, you probably should examine yourself. But yeah, that's typically, it just causes kind of this slow, and you're sitting there looking at the numbers and you're like, well, you're trying to figure out all this stuff. And what it really is it's people. And your people actually have the answers, and you can, go to your people. And if they feel comfortable being honest with you, they'll tell you what's wrong. But if they feel comfortable telling you, so that's, anyways, that's my take on, so permission to speak. We got on a little bit of a rabbit trail, but yeah, I'm really passionate about that as a leader. I try to promote that with my subordinates, and really,
David, dude, think about this. I don't know how this doesn't relate to chronic stress, because we're talking about a culture where you, me, and all the listeners can block and be blocked at any time, at all times. Any
yeah, very good point.
Speak freely of the entire planet. There's no social platform that doesn't empower, ironically disempowering.
Well, there's very few things that are as frustrating as being in an organization where you feel like, hey, I could tell them what's wrong, but they're not going to listen, or they'll give you some kind of, lip service and then do what they want anyways. Right. So that's extremely, as an employee of an organization or something like that, if you have that feeling like, well, they're just doing this. I mean, if they would just stop doing this and they could do this. Now, sometimes those people are just uninformed. So the lower level people, they're just uninformed about the big picture. Right. So there are things that the leaders aren't, the reason the leaders aren't doing it that way is for a reason. Right. But still, if you can get all those opinions, maybe as a leader, you do become more informed. So, but as an employee, say, you're talking about chronic stress, there's very few things that are more demoralizing than working in an organization where you don't feel heard at all. And they make decisions that seem totally, just out of touch. And that is a very frustrating and demoralizing and stressful thing to be in an organization like that.
What if we change? How is it any different than we're the employees of our culture, and the organization would be the institutions that govern our livelihoods, and how we perceive the world is rooted primarily in our subjective orientation of the world, or there wouldn't be the pendulum swinging back and forth of different representations of how we'd govern. We would just live in a dictatorship. And what if, even the CEO of every organization is a citizen of this macro organization that has the ability to not be heard nor hear, like subconsciously, right? With every social media interaction, all leaders of all companies in the entire world, they're employees of every culture. What if they're getting programmed to be tyrants, and we're no different than them, because every human that's slowly integrating and ironically disintegrating their being, right? We're integrating into social power. Think about what we're doing right now. It's like Jay and David off of this recording regardless of how authentic we try to be, we are not actually talking to each other at some level. We're talking to people we don't even know, that don't even exist right now, temporal spatially, because we're recording this on some fucking date at some fucking time. And it's like, at some level, no matter how hard I try to listen to you and get to know you and be genuine, we're still doing this for other fucking people.
Right.
Like, how about that? Like, what's happening to the world? Now, the reason I bring all this up is it came to my mind. This is stress. This is chronic stress of the planet. Like, the simplest example I could use, I'm trying to think of this like right off the gate, is like, you and me right now, all these listeners are in the way of our relationship developing, our friendship, our kinship, because when we're talking to people that aren't even here right now.
We're being maybe not 100%, the same. The conversation is maybe a little different than if it was just me and you.
It has to be. How could it not?
Right.
Psychologically.
Right.
We'd have to be omnipresent. We'd have to be non-human.
Right.
And it's happening at scale. And obviously I'm doing these all the time. And it's like, I feel like I'm in a social experiment. Cause
right.
like I'm above I'm like, there's me talking to you, and then there's Jay like looking at us. And I'm just like thinking like, what the fuck am I? What am I becoming? A monster. No, because like now I'm being like me about it. But
I
this
think
one more thing I want to add in the bucket here. In the bucket, you can move the bucket around. It's not just us and our employees. It's us, our employees, and our fans. It's not just us and our family, us and our friends. It's us, our friends, our family, and our fans. This extra element, and they don't exist physiologically. The fans don't exist. It's like a meta film choking our organization, planet Earth. I'm like trying to scrape at this idea and try to like understand it. But like, that's where, what if these fans are giving us, like they say famous people are crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if we're all famous, we're all crazy.
I think fame definitely takes a toll on this psychology of a human being, for sure.
I don't know how the hell we got.
I think that's
I'm
that's
stressed out after this conversation. Oh my God. Is this acute stress or is this chronic stress?
I think fame that's a huge topic. I mean, that would take somebody with more expertise than I have to unpackage that.
How did you become so self-aware and like responsible with your I guess, like, what makes you say that? Like, that's a very honest thing to say. Like, what do you think's underneath that? Because there's a lesson there for somebody.
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure. I'd have to ponder on that a little bit. I think some of it comes from being around people and being in an industry where I know I'm not an expert at something and I know somebody else is, and I consult them for that. So I have to recognize my boundaries in my job. If I'm trying to be a nephrologist and a cardiologist and a pulmonologist, now and here's the thing, I am all of those things in a way, right? Because I'm a family doctor and I'm a hospital medicine doc, and I have to do all of those things. But I also have to recognize when I'm at my limits and when I need help. And that's a skill that you kind of have to develop a feel for. And that changes over time too. So, I'm more comfortable with some things I wasn't comfortable with when I was a younger doc, and vice versa. Sometimes maybe I was more comfortable with something I shouldn't have been comfortable with, and I've realized I need help with it. So I think probably, if I was just to give you a quick answer, it probably comes from that of just that's a habit almost, probably, of just kind of like instinctually recognizing that I have limits.
How has it helped your life?
Oh, well, I think one of the places it's probably helped me was as a solopreneur. I guess another thing that way I learned it, maybe before I was a doctor, was, as a real estate investor when I was younger, I grew up doing construction and everything like that. And I try to do, when we started investing in real estate, we try to do everything ourselves, including manage the property, and made some big mistakes there. So that was a learning experience. And so I would say I learned that lesson, maybe even from that before I was even a doctor. And so learning that even if maybe you can do something, and maybe there's hanging drywall, I can hang drywall, but do I want to drywall a house? No, I can hire a crew to drywall a house and they can do it in a day what I would be able to do in a week. So that probably was maybe the first place that I started to learn that lesson. And then as a solopreneur later on in life, I still kind of have that tendency to kind of try to do everything, save a little bit of money. You don't want to pay for this. You don't want to pay for that. Oh, I can do this. I can put this website together. I can do this or that. And hiring coaching, one of the things I learned that reinforced this lesson again, which maybe apparently I need this lesson reinforced multiple times in my life, is that sometimes it's better to not try to do everything and be everything. So, but I think I think that lesson probably helped me, because I may have moved toward hiring folks to do things for me, instead of trying to just struggle, which a lot of people do. They struggle to try to do everything themselves, maybe too long. And I was able to move past that probably a little faster because of this ability to kind of recognize my inefficiencies, insufficiencies. That's probably the best place it's helped me, is as a solopreneur.
What you just said made me think this. I want to run by your thoughts here. With that experience, the real estate, endeavoring towards a goal, and things didn't, let's say, go the way you planned. So, and that's happened in my life. I'm sure many can relate to that. Things not going to plan, failure occurring. What if failing under acute stress creates like a post stress that actually creates ambition, because it's the way for the psyche to reorient its self meaning or self representation. Meaning, like, they say when you fail, you get back up, and you're so like acute stress is a necessary byproduct, prerequisite to meaning, let's say. Failure under acute stress creates some I don't want to say post-traumatic, because there's degrees of trauma, but like having a failed business, which I've had, is not as traumatic as being stabbed in the stomach, most likely by a robber, although maybe depending on whom we're talking about here, how big the ego is, right? Like, right. But
right.
So just follow me here. Like acute stress, failure happens. I'm just making up words here. Post stress, like the inversion, manifests itself in ambition.
Yeah.
In because it's like I need to reorient who I idealized myself to be. And I even need to reorient who I was. So it's not just, pride of who I was before I endeavored. It's the idealized self, who I thought I was worth being. So it's, I don't know, all that just came to my thoughts. Like acute stress, failure occurs instead of success. Acute stress, success, maybe that's meaning, representation of the idealized self, actuality, the ideal self. But failure under acute stress creates a post stress that impels, That's where like the winners are born, in a sense. Like, you don't give up, you keep going.
Yeah.
I
That's
don't know.
grit. Yeah. So I think that
Some
degree of
people
stress
don't
is
keep
good.
going.
Some people don't, because it it overcomes them instead of them overcoming it. And I think
Those
maybe,
people need leaders.
yes. Yeah, or
Those people need
coaches.
leaders to wake them up. Well, and just, it could be employers.
Right.
It could be, it's almost like they need a culture to resuscitate them.
Mm-hmm.
I think if I'm psychologizing my own life's journey, which I'm always doing, I like all this science stuff. We got to have you back.
For sure. Oh, I love it.
Please
This
end take us home. What's the takeaway? The floor is yours. I'm going to stop pontificating. We'll leave the audience to come back for next time, and we'll get into more of these.
Well, first of all, please don't ever stop pontificating, because that's one of my favorite things about you. But
Thanks,
that's the
brother.
fun part. It's always fun to pontificate. But I would say the take home would be, stress is a natural part of the human experience. If it becomes excessive to the point where it's harmful, or it's causing self harm, essentially, as a way to cope, then that probably needs to be, well, it doesn't have to be, but it would benefit people to make an adjustment there and try to focus on coping mechanisms that are going to be productive, instead of counterproductive coping mechanisms. And we all have stress, and like you said, it can be a propellant. Stress and failure and all those things can propel us to make ourselves better. And that's really what it's supposed to do, right? So it should make us stronger and more resilient and better. And so that's the goal, is to have stressful times in our life make us better, and not worse.